Runaway teen knocks on biker's garage at midnight. Can my sister hide here for the night? The chrome of Hawk's motorcycle gleamed under the dim light of his garage. His weathered hands moved methodically over the metal, each stroke of the polishing cloth revealing another patch of mirror-like surface. The familiar scent of oil and metal filled the air, mixing with the cool night breeze that crept under the garage door. The steady hum of the engine provided a comforting backdrop to his evening ritual. This was his sanctuary, where memories of Alice felt closest, where the rest of the world couldn't touch him. 5 years had passed since she'd gone, but nights like these still held echoes of her presence. The sudden knock shattered his solitude. Hawk's hands stilled on the bike. Another knock, more urgent this time, followed by hushed whispers. He straightened up slowly, his joints protesting after hours of work. The clock on the wall showed midnight. When he pulled open the door, the sight before him made him pause. 2 girls stood there, their faces pale in the spill of light from his garage. The older one had her arm wrapped protectively around the younger, both of them shivering despite the mild spring evening. "Please," the older girl said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can my sister hide here for the night?" Her eyes darted past him, scanning the garage interior. "Just for tonight. We won't cause any trouble." Hawk studied them carefully. The older girl, she couldn't be more than 17, held herself rigid, like someone expecting a blow. The younger one pressed closer to her sister, eyes wide with fear. "Who are you running from?" he asked gruffly. "Our stepfather," the older girl replied. "Gordon, he's getting worse. We couldn't stay there anymore." Her voice cracked slightly, but she lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm Lucy. This is my sister, Megan." Megan clutched her sister's jacket tighter, and Hawk noticed the slight tremor in her hands. They both had that look he recognized from his time in service, the look of people who'd seen too much, too young. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough scratch of his beard. Everything in him said to turn them away. He'd spent years keeping the world at arm's length, building walls around his solitary life. But something in their desperate faces struck a chord he thought had long since gone silent. "One night," he said finally, stepping back from the doorway. "Just one, and I don't want any questions or explanations. You stay quiet, and you're gone by morning." Relief flooded Lucy's face. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you so much." They slipped inside, and Hawk closed the door behind them. In the corner there was an old cot he sometimes used during late-night repair jobs. He gestured toward it. "You can use that," he said. "There's a blanket in the cabinet." The girls moved quietly, efficiently, like people used to making themselves scarce. Lucy helped Megan settle onto the cot, while Hawk returned to his workbench, pretending to focus on his tools while watching them from the corner of his eye. What had he gotten himself into? He'd spent years avoiding exactly this kind of complication, and now here he was, harboring 2 teenage runaways in his garage. As he observed their careful movements, the way Lucy positioned herself between her sister and the door, he felt an unwelcome twinge of concern. The sensation was foreign, uncomfortable. He hadn't let himself care about anyone since Alice died. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now back to the story. The garage felt like an icebox, with only the weak glow of a small work lamp cutting through the darkness. Hawk watched from his workbench as Lucy helped Megan settle into the hidden storage room, a cramped space usually filled with spare parts and old tools. He'd cleared enough room for them to lay down some blankets he'd found in a dusty corner. Lucy moved with careful precision, like someone used to walking on eggshells. Her hands trembled slightly as she spread out the thin blankets, but her movements were practiced and efficient. She kept glancing at the garage door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. "You girls hungry?" Hawk's gruff voice broke the silence. He hadn't planned on having company tonight, but he had some canned soup in the small mini-fridge he kept for long work nights. Lucy hesitated, looking at Megan, who sat huddled in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees. "We don't want to be any trouble," she said softly. "Ain't trouble to eat," Hawk muttered, already pulling out 2 cans of chicken noodle soup. He warmed them up on the hot plate he kept in the garage, the smell of salt and chicken filling the cold air. As they ate in silence, Lucy's spoon stirred the soup more than it delivered food to her mouth. "Gordon," she started, then stopped, pressing her lips together. "He wasn't always this bad. After Mom died, something in him just—" She trailed off, her eyes distant. Hawk nodded, not pushing for more. He recognized the look in her eyes, the same one he'd seen in his own reflection after Alice passed. Loss could change people, but it was no excuse for what this Gordon had become. "He started drinking more," Lucy continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Started getting angry about everything. The way we dressed, who we talked to at school, what time we came home." She glanced at Megan, who had curled up even tighter in her corner. Hawk kept his distance, staying at his workbench while the girls huddled together in their makeshift shelter. He understood their need for space, for feeling like they had some control over their situation. The soup bowls sat half empty between them, like a barrier neither side was ready to cross. The quiet settled over them again, broken only by the occasional creak of the old garage settling, and the distant sound of cars passing on the highway. Hawk tried to focus on some paperwork, but his eyes kept drifting to the girls. Lucy maintained her vigilant watch over Megan, who had finally dozed off, exhaustion winning over fear. Then the sound they'd all been dreading shattered the peace. Tires on gravel, an engine growling into the driveway. Lucy's head snapped up, her face draining of color. Her whole body went rigid, and her eyes grew wide with terror. "That's his car," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know that sound anywhere." Hawk stood up slowly, his jaw set in a hard line. He'd been in enough fights to know when one was coming. The girls scrambled deeper into the storage room, and Lucy pulled Megan close, covering her sister's mouth to muffle any sounds. Standing his full height, Hawk moved toward the garage door. His hands curled into fists at his sides, and his shoulders squared, ready for whatever was about to come through that door. Through the small, dusty window of his garage, Hawk watched Gordon's car lurch to a stop, its headlights cutting harsh beams through the darkness. The engine died with an angry sputter, and a car door slammed. Inside the garage, Lucy and Megan huddled closer together in the storage room, their breathing quick and shallow. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel outside. Hawk's hand tightened on the workbench, his knuckles white against the metal surface. The girls had only been here for a few hours, but already their fear felt personal to him. "I know they're in there!" Gordon's voice boomed through the door. "Open up!" Hawk took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Nobody here but me," he called back, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Working late on my bike." A fist pounded against the metal door, making it rattle in its frame. "Don't lie to me, old man. My girls ran this way. I saw them." "Like I said," Hawk repeated. "Nobody here but me." He glanced toward the storage room. Lucy stood in the doorway, her face pale but determined, one arm wrapped protectively around Megan. Gordon kicked the door hard enough to make the hinges creak. "Listen here, those are my girls, and I have every right." "It's midnight," Hawk cut in, his voice growing harder. "You're on private property. I suggest you leave." "Or what?" Gordon's laugh was ugly. "You hiding something in there, old-timer? Maybe I should call the cops, have them take a look around." Hawk's jaw clenched. He could smell alcohol on Gordon's breath through the gap under the door. "Go ahead," he said evenly. "Call them. I'm sure they'd love to hear why you're harassing an old vet at midnight." There was a long pause. Hawk could hear Gordon's heavy breathing, could almost feel the rage radiating through the door. The silence stretched, thick with tension. "This isn't over," Gordon finally spat. "Those girls belong with me. I'm their guardian, their family. You're nothing but a stranger." "Maybe so," Hawk replied, "but I'm a stranger who's telling you to get off my property." Gordon's footsteps retreated, slow and deliberate. The car door opened and slammed shut again. The engine roared to life, and tires spun on gravel as Gordon backed out too fast, the car fishtailing slightly before straightening out. Only when the red taillights had disappeared down the road did Hawk let out the breath he'd been holding. He turned to find Lucy still standing in the storage room doorway, her face a mix of relief and lingering fear. "He'll be back," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Hawk nodded, surprised by the protective surge he felt looking at these two frightened girls. "Probably," he agreed. "But not tonight." Lucy guided Megan back to the cot they'd set up earlier. The younger girl was shaking, and Lucy wrapped an arm around her shoulders, murmuring soft words of comfort. Hawk watched them, remembering how it felt to have someone to protect, someone who needed you. It had been a long time since he'd felt that way. "Try to get some sleep," he said gruffly, turning back to his workbench. "You're safe here for now." The girls settled onto the cot, huddled close together under the thin blanket Hawk had given them. Their breathing gradually steadied, though Hawk could tell they were still awake, listening for any sound that might signal Gordon's return. The morning sun filtered through the dusty kitchen windows, casting long shadows across Hawk's worn linoleum floor. He stood at the stove, his weathered hands gripping a spatula as he flipped pancakes with mechanical precision. The sizzle of the butter and the soft bubble of coffee brewing were the only sounds breaking the heavy silence. Behind him, Lucy and Megan sat at his small kitchen table, their shoulders hunched, looking out of place among the faded wallpaper and dated furnishings. Hawk couldn't remember the last time anyone else had sat at that table. 5 years, maybe more. He placed a stack of golden pancakes on the table, along with some butter and syrup he'd found in the back of his cupboard. "Eat," he said gruffly, turning back to pour himself a cup of coffee. The girls exchanged glances before carefully helping themselves. Hawk leaned against the counter, watching them over the rim of his coffee mug. The scene felt foreign to him, like a photograph from someone else's life. His eyes drifted to the empty chair where Alice used to sit. She would have known what to do with these girls. She always knew how to handle delicate situations. But Alice wasn't here anymore, and he'd spent the years since her passing building walls around himself, finding comfort in the solitude of his garage and the open road. Megan cut her pancakes into tiny pieces, her movements careful and controlled. Lucy ate with more purpose, but her eyes kept darting to the windows, checking for any sign of movement outside. The fear was still there, raw and visible. Hawk's coffee had grown cold by the time he finished it. He'd never been good with silence, but words didn't come easy either. He busied himself washing the few dishes they'd used, the running water filling the uncomfortable void. "Thank you." Lucy's voice was barely above a whisper. She'd approached the sink without him noticing, her plate in hand. "For letting us stay last night, for breakfast." She set her plate down beside the sink, her fingers lingering on the ceramic edge. "I know we can't—" She paused, swallowing hard. "We can't stay here forever." Hawk turned off the water, drying his hands on a dish towel. He looked at Lucy, really looked at her for the first time. Her eyes were older than her years, carrying a weight no teenager should have to bear. Behind her, Megan sat quietly at the table, watching them both with nervous attention. He cleared his throat. "We'll figure something out," he said, surprising himself with the words. He hadn't meant to say "we," hadn't meant to get involved beyond offering a night's shelter. But looking at these two girls, something stirred in his chest, a feeling he thought had died with Alice. Lucy nodded, relief flickering across her face. "I don't know how," she admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "But we can't go back there. We just can't." "No," Hawk agreed, his voice firm. "You can't." He hung the dish towel on its hook, buying time as he gathered his thoughts. "I'll help you figure it out. Don't know how yet, but we'll think of something." The words hung in the air between them, a promise he wasn't sure how to keep, but one he knew he couldn't break. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Hawk's property as he walked the perimeter, his boots crunching on the gravel. The familiar sounds of birds and distant traffic did little to ease his troubled mind. He'd gotten used to silence over the years, but now it felt different, heavy with responsibility. He paused near the old oak tree at the edge of his land, running a weathered hand through his gray hair. Through the kitchen window, he could see Lucy and Megan sitting at the table, their heads close together as they talked in hushed tones. The sight stirred something in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since Alice passed. The rumble of an engine shattered his thoughts. Hawk's muscles tensed as he recognized Gordon's beat-up sedan pulling up to his property. This time, two other vehicles followed, a rusty pickup truck and a dark SUV. The cars kicked up dust as they came to a stop. Gordon stepped out first, slamming his door. Two men Hawk didn't recognize emerged from the other vehicles. One was tall and lanky, wearing a stained denim jacket. The other was shorter but stocky, with thick arms crossed over his chest. Neither looked friendly. "Maxwell!" Gordon's voice boomed across the yard. "We need to talk about my girls!" Hawk planted his feet firmly on the ground, positioning himself between the men and his garage. "Nothing to talk about," he called back, keeping his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. "You need to leave." Gordon's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "Brought some friends this time. Thought we could have a proper conversation about what's mine." The two men flanked Gordon, spreading out slightly. The taller one cracked his knuckles, a gesture that might have intimidated someone else, but Hawk had seen too much in his life to be scared by playground tactics. "Those girls aren't property," Hawk said, his voice low but carrying across the yard, "and they're not going anywhere with you." "You don't get to make that call," Gordon spat, taking a step forward. "You're harboring minors. That's kidnapping." The stocky man chimed in. "Better listen to reason, old man. Don't want this getting messy." Hawk didn't move an inch. He could feel Lucy and Megan watching from inside, and that knowledge only strengthened his resolve. "Last warning," he said, his eyes locked on Gordon. "Get off my property." The tension crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. Gordon's face reddened, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. For a moment, Hawk thought they might rush him. 3 against 1 weren't great odds, even with his military background. But something in Hawk's stance must have given Gordon pause. Maybe it was the way he stood, completely still, like a soldier ready for battle. Or perhaps it was the cold determination in his eyes that promised this wouldn't be an easy fight. After what felt like an eternity, Gordon spat on the ground. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Not by a long shot." He jerked his head at his companions, and they backed away slowly, never taking their eyes off Hawk. The 3 men climbed back into their vehicles. Gordon's engine roared as he reversed, spraying gravel in his wake. The other 2 cars followed, leaving only dust and an uneasy silence behind. Hawk watched until they disappeared down the road, his heart pounding harder than he cared to admit. The quiet that settled back over the property felt different now. Dangerous, like the calm before a storm. The morning sun filtered through the dusty garage windows as Hawk stood at his workbench, absently polishing a wrench. 3 days had passed since the girls first knocked on his door, and life had fallen into an unexpected pattern. Every morning he'd wake up early to make breakfast. Nothing fancy, just eggs and toast. But it was more than the girls had been used to. Lucy sat on an old wooden stool near the garage entrance, watching him work. Her shoulders weren't as tense as they'd been that first night, but Hawk could still see the wariness in her eyes. She reminded him of a wounded animal, careful but slowly learning to trust. "Gordon wasn't always like this," Lucy said quietly, breaking the morning silence. Her fingers played with the frayed edges of her sweater. "After Mom died, he changed. Or maybe he just stopped pretending." Hawk set down his wrench, giving Lucy his full attention. He didn't say anything, just nodded, letting her find her own words. "At first, it was little things," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He'd get mad if dinner wasn't ready exactly when he wanted it. He'd check our phones, read our messages. Then he started following us to school sometimes, just to make sure we weren't talking to anyone he didn't approve of." Megan appeared in the doorway, hugging herself. She moved to sit next to her sister, and Lucy automatically put an arm around her shoulders. "The worst part wasn't even the yelling," Lucy said, her eyes distant. "It was never knowing what would set him off. We'd tiptoe around the house, trying to be perfect. But it didn't matter. He'd find something wrong anyway." Hawk's jaw tightened. He'd seen men like Gordon before. Bullies who got off on power, on making others feel small. The girls weren't just running from a strict stepfather. They were escaping someone who enjoyed their fear. Throughout the day, more details emerged. Lucy would drop them casually, like pieces of a dark puzzle falling into place. How Gordon would accidentally break things they cared about. How he'd tell them their mother would be ashamed of them. How he'd stand outside their bedroom doors at night, just to let them know he was there. By afternoon, Hawk had moved his tool chest inside the house, setting up a makeshift bedroom in the spare room. He didn't say anything about it, and neither did the girls. But they all knew they weren't going anywhere soon. That evening, they sat around Hawk's small kitchen table. The only sound was forks scraping against plates as they ate the simple pasta dinner he'd prepared. Hawk watched as Lucy helped Megan with her bread, cutting it into smaller pieces, a habit born from years of being the only one looking out for her sister. The weight of their trust settled on his shoulders like a heavy coat. These girls, who had every reason to distrust the world, had chosen to put their faith in him. He wasn't sure what to do with that faith, wasn't sure he deserved it. But looking at them now, safe at his table, he knew he couldn't let them down. They finished their meal in the same comfortable silence they'd started it in. Hawk collected the plates, his movements mechanical as his mind worked through what this all meant. He wasn't just giving them a place to hide anymore. He'd become their protector, their safe harbor. The responsibility should have felt overwhelming, but instead, it filled an empty space he hadn't even known was there. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Hawk's garage, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal hung in the air as he worked on his motorcycle, methodically checking each part. Lucy sat nearby on a worn wooden stool, watching his movements with keen interest. "Hand me that wrench, would you?" Hawk asked, pointing to his toolbox. Lucy quickly located the right tool and passed it to him. Her fingers were already smudged with grease from helping him earlier. She'd shown a natural talent for mechanical work that had surprised him. "Like this?" she asked, reaching over to adjust a bolt he'd been working on. Her movements were careful but confident. "That's right," Hawk nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You've got good instincts for this." From her spot on an old armchair in the corner, Megan watched them quietly. Her eyes were softer now, not filled with the same fear they'd held when she first arrived. She hugged her knees to her chest, but her posture was relaxed. A few days ago, she would have flinched at any sudden movement. Now she seemed content just being in their presence. "My friend's dad taught me a little about cars," Lucy explained, wiping her hands on a rag. "Before we had to stop going over there." Her voice trailed off, and Hawk noticed the shadow that crossed her face. He felt a familiar ache in his chest. These girls had been through so much, yet here they were, showing such resilience. The garage, once his lonely sanctuary, now felt alive with their presence. Even in silence, the space seemed warmer somehow. Hawk picked up another tool, showing Lucy how to check the bike's alignment. "See how this should line up perfectly? If it's off even a little, it can cause problems down the road." As he demonstrated the technique, he caught himself feeling something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose. Since Alice died, he'd been going through the motions, existing but not really living. Now, watching Lucy absorb his instructions and seeing Megan's quiet trust, he felt needed again. The afternoon light was starting to fade when Hawk finally put down his tools. He looked at the girls, his expression growing serious. "Listen," he said, his voice low and steady. "If Gordon shows up again, we need to be ready to leave right away. No questions, no delays." Lucy's hands stilled on the rag she was holding. She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his. There was a moment of hesitation before she nodded slowly, understanding the weight of his words. "I know," she said quietly. "We can't stay here forever." Her voice carried a mix of resignation and worry. Hawk watched as she glanced at Megan, who had straightened up in her chair, tension visible in her shoulders. The protective instinct that had been growing in him these past few days surged stronger. These girls needed more than just a temporary hiding place. They needed someone who would stand between them and danger. "When the time comes," he said, his voice firm but gentle, "we'll go. Together." Lucy nodded again, her fingers twisting the greasy rag. The trust in her eyes made his heart ache. It was a trust he hadn't earned yet, but one he was determined to deserve. The familiar rumble of an engine cut through the night air, making Hawk's head snap up from his workbench. Lucy, who had been organizing tools nearby, froze mid-motion, a wrench clutched tightly in her trembling hands. Megan, curled up on the worn leather couch in the corner, pulled her knees closer to her chest. Hawk moved silently too, the garage window, his weathered hands pressing against the cool glass. The moonlight cast long shadows across the driveway, but the sound was unmistakable. A car, somewhere in the distance, its engine echoing through the quiet night. "Is it him?" Lucy whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble. Hawk squinted into the darkness. "Can't tell yet. But don't worry, you're safe here." The words felt strange coming from his mouth. For years he'd lived alone in this garage, speaking only when necessary, keeping the world at arm's length. Now here he was, making promises to two young girls who'd stumbled into his life just days ago. Megan's quiet voice broke through his thoughts. "What if he tries to break in?" "He won't," Hawk said firmly, turning to face the girls. The dim light from his workbench lamp cast a warm glow across their worried faces. "I've got the door secured and there's no way he's getting past me." Lucy set down the wrench and moved closer to her sister, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. The gesture reminded Hawk of Alice. how she used to comfort others, even when she was scared herself. He pushed the memory away and focused on the present. The engine sound grew louder, then fainter, then disappeared altogether. Minutes ticked by in tense silence as they waited for any sign of Gordon's return. Hawk kept his vigil by the window, watching the empty driveway, while the girls huddled together on the couch. "Try to get some rest," Hawk said after an hour had passed. "I'll keep watch." Lucy shook her head. "I can't sleep. Not when he might be out there." Hawk understood. He pulled up a chair and sat down, his eyes never leaving the window. "Then we'll wait together." The night stretched on, marked only by the steady tick of the clock on the wall and the occasional distant sound of cars passing on the main road. Each time an engine growled in the distance, the girls tensed, but none turned out to be Gordon. As the first hints of dawn began to paint the sky in pale blues and pinks, Lucy's shoulders finally relaxed a little. Megan had dozed off against her sister's shoulder, her face peaceful in sleep. "Thank you," Lucy said softly, careful not to wake Megan. "For staying up with us." Hawk nodded, his expression softening as he looked at the girls. They were starting to trust him, to feel secure in his presence. He could see it in the way Megan had finally allowed herself to fall asleep, in the way Lucy's guard had lowered enough to show genuine gratitude. The morning sun crept through the garage windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Another night had passed without Gordon appearing, but Hawk wasn't fooled by the peaceful morning. He knew better than to think this was over. Gordon was out there somewhere, planning his next move, and they needed to be ready when he made it. Time was running out, and their next decision would be crucial. Hawk sat at his kitchen table, staring at the worn surface while his coffee grew cold. The morning sun cast long shadows across the room, and the quiet was broken only by the soft murmur of the girls' voices from the garage. 5 days had passed since they'd arrived on his doorstep, and he knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. He pulled out his old flip phone and opened it slowly. The screen flickered to life, showing a list of contacts he hadn't called in years. Old friends, fellow riders, people who owed him favors. His thumb hovered over the first name. Mike, an old army buddy who'd moved to Cedar Rapids. "What are you doing?" Lucy's voice startled him. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, watching him with careful eyes. "Making some calls," Hawk said, his voice gruff. "We need to figure something out. You can't stay here forever." Lucy's shoulders tensed. "We're not going back to Gordon." "No," Hawk agreed, shaking his head. "But we need to get you somewhere safe, somewhere he won't think to look." He dialed Mike's number, and after 3 rings, his old friend picked up. They talked in low voices about possibilities: a small apartment above Mike's garage, work at the local diner, a fresh start. Lucy listened, her face growing more worried with each passing minute. When Hawk hung up, she burst out, "But what if he finds us there too? What if—" "Lucy," Hawk interrupted gently. "Sometimes the hardest part isn't running away, it's deciding where to run to." He made more calls throughout the morning. Each conversation brought new possibilities, new towns, new chances. He wrote everything down in his messy handwriting on a yellow legal pad: addresses, phone numbers, promises of help. Megan joined them later, her eyes wide as she looked at Hawk's notes. "Are we really leaving?" she asked, her voice small. "We need to," Hawk said, surprised by the "we" that had slipped out. "This town isn't safe anymore. Gordon knows where you are, and he won't stop coming around." Lucy paced the kitchen, her hands twisting together. "But we don't know anyone in those places, at least here." She trailed off, looking at Hawk. "At least here you have me," he finished for her. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Hawk stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his garage. It had been his sanctuary for 5 years, a place to hide from the world after Alice died. Now it was a shelter for these 2 girls who'd somehow worked their way into his heart. "I'll take care of everything," he promised, turning back to them. "Got some friends who can help. We'll find you a place to stay, maybe even get you back in school." He paused, watching their reactions. "It won't be easy, but it'll be better than living in fear." Lucy stopped pacing and looked at the notes on the table. "When?" she asked simply. "Soon," Hawk replied. "Very soon. Just need to—" A sudden, loud knock on the front door cut through his words. They all froze, staring at each other in the sudden silence. The heavy knock echoed through the house, making Lucy and Megan freeze in place. Hawk's muscles tensed as he moved toward the door, already knowing who would be on the other side. He gestured for the girls to stay back, but Lucy crept closer anyway, her face pale but determined. Hawk opened the door just enough to see Gordon's hulking frame filling the doorway. The man's face was red with anger, his breathing heavy like a bull ready to charge. "Where are they?" Gordon demanded, his voice rough with barely contained rage. "I know you're hiding them in there." Hawk kept his grip firm on the door, maintaining the narrow opening. "You need to leave," he said, his voice steady and firm. "Now." Gordon's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "Those girls are my responsibility. You have no right to keep them from me." He tried to push against the door, but Hawk held it firmly in place. Lucy appeared beside Hawk, her hands trembling but her voice strong. "We're not going back with you, Gordon. Ever." "Lucy!" Gordon's voice changed, becoming sickeningly sweet. "Come on now, honey. You know this isn't right. Your sister needs to be home, where she belongs." Hawk felt his stomach turn at Gordon's attempted manipulation. He shifted his stance, placing himself more firmly between Gordon and Lucy. "The only place these girls need to be is away from you," Hawk growled, his patience wearing thin. Gordon's fake smile vanished instantly. His eyes darkened as he jabbed a finger at Hawk's chest. "You don't know anything about my family. You're just some washed-up old biker who needs to mind his own business." Lucy flinched at Gordon's tone, but stood her ground. "We're not your family," she said. "You lost any right to call us that a long time ago." Gordon's face contorted with fury. He slammed his fist against the doorframe, making Lucy jump. "You ungrateful little— That's enough!" Hawk's voice boomed through the entranceway. He stepped forward, using his full height to crowd Gordon back. "You lay one hand on this door again, and I'm calling the police." Gordon took a step back, but his eyes were filled with dangerous hate. His lips curled into a threatening smile that made Lucy press closer to Hawk's side. "You're gonna regret this," Gordon snarled, his words dripping with venom. "Both of you." His gaze shifted between Hawk and Lucy, the threat clear in his eyes. Hawk felt his protective instincts surge. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he kept his voice level. "Last warning. Get off my property." Gordon's face twisted with rage, but he took another step back. "This isn't over," he spat, pointing at Lucy. "Not by a long shot." Hawk stood at the garage window, watching Gordon's taillights disappear down the dark road. His weathered hands gripped the windowsill, knuckles white with tension. The encounter had left him shaken, though he'd never admit it. Behind him, he could hear Lucy's uneven breathing and Megan's quiet sniffles. "He's not going to stop, is he?" Lucy's voice was barely above a whisper. Hawk turned from the window, taking in the sight of the 2 girls. Lucy stood protective next to Megan, her arm around her younger sister's shoulders. The dim light of the garage cast shadows across their faces, making them look even more vulnerable than usual. "No," Hawk said simply. "He won't." He moved to his workbench, absently organizing his tools while his mind raced. The garage had been a temporary solution, but now it felt like a trap. Every shadow, every sound outside made them jump. This wasn't living. It was just hiding. "We can't stay here much longer," he said, placing a wrench back in its proper spot. "Gordon knows where you are now. It's only a matter of time before he does something drastic." Lucy's face paled. "But where else can we go? If we run to another town, he'll just follow us. He always finds us." Her voice cracked on the last words. Hawk pulled up an old wooden stool and sat down heavily. "Running isn't the answer. I've seen enough in my life to know that running just postpones the inevitable." "I'm scared to face him," Lucy admitted, her usual tough exterior crumbling slightly. "Every time I see him, I feel like that little girl again, helpless and trapped." Megan pressed closer to her sister, and Hawk could see tears forming in her eyes. The sight stirred something in his chest, reminding him of why he'd gotten involved in the first place. "Listen," he said, his voice gentler than usual. "You girls deserve better than living in fear, always looking over your shoulders. That's not a life. It's a prison." He stood up and walked over to them, his boots scuffing against the concrete floor. "I know Gordon terrifies you. He's counting on that fear to keep you under his control. But you're stronger than you think." Lucy looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen it," Hawk replied. "You had the courage to run away, to protect your sister, to knock on a stranger's door at midnight. That takes guts." Megan spoke up, her voice small but steady. "What should we do?" Hawk took a deep breath. He'd been thinking about this since Gordon's first visit. "We need to go to the police, file a report, get everything on record. It won't be easy, but it's the only way to end this properly." Lucy's body tensed. "The police? But what if they don't believe us?" "They'll believe you," Hawk said firmly, "and I'll be right there with you, every step of the way." He gestured for them to sit down, pulling up extra stools. The three of them formed a small circle in the middle of the garage, surrounded by tools and the familiar smell of motor oil. It felt like a moment of decision, a turning point. "This isn't just about escaping anymore," Hawk explained. "It's about taking your lives back. Gordon needs to face consequences for what he's done." The girls exchanged looks, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Lucy nodded slowly. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger than before. "You're right. We have to stop running." The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot as Hawk's pickup truck rumbled down the quiet streets toward the police station. Lucy sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Megan huddled in the back, staring out the window with wide eyes. "It's going to be okay," Hawk said, his gravelly voice gentle. "The police will help us sort this out." Lucy nodded, but her knuckles were white from gripping her hands together. "What if they don't believe us?" "They'll believe you," Hawk assured her, checking his rearview mirror out of habit. His heart skipped a beat when he spotted a familiar car several lengths behind them. "Don't look back," he warned quietly. "But Gordon's following us." Megan whimpered from the back seat. Lucy reached back to squeeze her sister's knee. "What do we do?" she whispered. Hawk's jaw tightened as he watched Gordon's car draw closer in the mirror. The police station was still 2 blocks away. He could make it, but something in his gut told him Gordon wouldn't let them reach it without a fight. "When I stop the truck," Hawk said carefully, "I want you both to stay inside. Lock the doors. Don't get out unless I tell you to, understand?" The girls nodded, fear evident in their faces. Hawk pulled into the police station parking lot, deliberately choosing a spot close to the entrance. Gordon's car screeched into the lot behind them, cutting across empty spaces to block them in. "Lock the doors," Hawk ordered as he stepped out of the truck. He heard the click of the locks engaging behind him. Gordon exploded out of his car, face red with rage. "You think you can just take my girls?" he shouted, advancing on Hawk with clenched fists. "They're coming home with me." "They're not your property," Hawk said, standing his ground between Gordon and the truck. "And they're not going anywhere with you." "The hell they're not!" Gordon lunged forward, grabbing Hawk's jacket. "You've got no right to keep them from me. I'm their father." "Stepfather," Hawk corrected, keeping his voice steady despite the fury building in his chest. "And from what they've told me, you lost any right to call yourself that a long time ago." Gordon's face twisted with rage. "You don't know anything about my family." He shoved Hawk hard, making him stumble back a step. "Those girls are mine, and if you don't hand them over right now, You'll what?" Hawk challenged, regaining his balance. He could see Lucy and Megan watching from inside the truck, their faces pale with fear. "Go ahead, show everyone exactly who you are." Gordon raised his fist, but before he could swing, police sirens wailed to life. Two officers burst out of the station, hands on their weapons. "Break it up!" one officer shouted, rushing forward. "Step away from each other now!" Gordon backed away, his hands raised, but his eyes burned with hatred. "This man kidnapped my stepdaughters," he snarled, pointing at Hawk. "I want him arrested!" The second officer moved to Gordon's side, while the first positioned himself between the two men. "Sir, we're going to need you to calm down," the officer said to Gordon. After getting a better look at his face, the officer's expression changed. "Mr. Thompson, we've been looking for you. There are some serious allegations we need to discuss." As the officers led Gordon away in handcuffs, his protests echoing across the parking lot, Hawk turned back to the truck. Lucy and Megan watched through the windows, their faces a mixture of relief and apprehension. Hawk knew this was just the beginning, but at least Gordon couldn't hurt them anymore. The police station buzzed with activity as officers processed Gordon's arrest. Lucy and Megan sat huddled together on a wooden bench, their shoulders touching, finding comfort in each other's presence. Hawk stood nearby, his weathered face showing both relief and concern. "You girls doing okay?" he asked, his voice gentler than usual. Lucy nodded, but her hands were still shaking. Megan leaned into her sister, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. The reality of what had just happened was starting to sink in. Detective Sarah Martinez approached them with 3 cups of hot chocolate. "Here," she said, handing them out. "This might help calm your nerves." Outside the station, a small crowd had gathered. News traveled fast in their small town, and already reporters were setting up cameras. Through the window, Hawk could see familiar faces from around town. Mrs. Thompson from the diner, Old Bill from the hardware store, and several others he recognized. "Some folks are asking questions," Detective Martinez said quietly to Hawk. "Word's getting around about what Gordon did. Most people are horrified. Want to help?" Lucy overheard and tensed up. "I don't want everyone knowing our business," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Nobody needs to know the details," Hawk reassured her. "That's your story to tell, if and when you want to." A social worker named Janet arrived, explaining the next steps. The girls would be placed in temporary protective custody while the legal process unfolded. Lucy's grip on Megan's hand tightened at the news. "Can we stay with Hawk?" Megan asked suddenly, breaking her silence. It was the first time she'd spoken since Gordon's arrest. Janet smiled sympathetically. "We'll need to follow proper procedures, but we'll consider all options that are in your best interest." Through the station windows, Hawk noticed some townspeople holding up signs of support. Mrs. Thompson had organized a small vigil, and candles were being lit despite the daylight. Others were dropping off care packages at the station's front desk. "Look," Hawk said softly, gesturing to the window. "You're not alone in this anymore." Lucy stood up and walked to the window, watching the growing crowd. Her eyes widened as she saw her old teacher, Mr. Peterson, joining the vigil. "I didn't think anyone would care," she mumbled. "Small towns can surprise you," Hawk replied, standing beside her. "When they're not gossiping about each other, they're looking out for their own." Detective Martinez returned with some paperwork. "We'll need statements from both of you," she explained gently to the girls. "But it can wait until tomorrow if you're not up for it today." Megan joined her sister at the window, and Hawk watched as they took in the scene outside. The fear that had dominated their lives for so long was still there, but something else was emerging, a glimmer of hope. They settled back onto the bench, processing everything that had happened. The hot chocolate had grown cold, forgotten in their hands. The bustling of the police station seemed distant now, like background noise to their thoughts. Hawk sat down next to them, his presence solid and reassuring. The three of them sat in silence, each lost in their own reflections about the day's events. The worst of the storm had passed, but they all knew that healing would take time. The late afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Hawk's kitchen, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Lucy sat at the table, her math homework spread out before her, while Megan sketched quietly in her notebook. The scene was so ordinary, so peaceful, that sometimes Hawk had to remind himself how far they'd come. 2 weeks had passed since Gordon's arrest, and the girls were finally settling into a routine. The local high school had welcomed them. No questions asked, thanks to some paperwork from social services. Lucy was catching up on her missed classes, and Megan had even joined the art club. "This algebra stuff is impossible," Lucy groaned, pushing her textbook away. "I don't know how I'm going to catch up." Hawk looked up from the coffee he was brewing. "You're smart, Lucy. You'll figure it out." He paused, then added, "Alice was good at math. She used to help the neighbor kids with their homework." The mention of his wife made both girls look up. It was the first time he'd brought her up voluntarily. "Alice?" Megan asked softly, her pencil pausing mid-stroke. Hawk nodded, pulling out a chair and sitting down. His coffee mug warmed his rough hands. "My wife. She passed away 5 years ago." He took a deep breath, surprised at how much easier it felt to talk about her now. "She was a teacher, actually, elementary school." Lucy closed her textbook, giving him her full attention. "What was she like?" "Kind," Hawk said, a small smile touching his lips. "Always thinking about others. She'd have liked you too." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a worn photograph. In it, a woman with warm eyes and auburn hair smiled at the camera, her arm around a younger version of Hawk. Megan leaned in close, studying the picture. "You look happy," she observed. "We were," Hawk agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "After she died, I closed myself off. Didn't want to let anyone in." He looked at the girls, his expression softening. "Didn't think I needed to." Lucy reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The gesture was simple but filled with understanding. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle ticking of the kitchen clock. "I'm making spaghetti tonight," Hawk announced, standing up. "Alice's recipe. She always said good food brings people together." The girls helped him prepare dinner, moving around the kitchen with growing familiarity. Megan chopped vegetables while Lucy stirred the sauce, following Hawk's instructions. The kitchen filled with the aroma of garlic and herbs, and for the first time in years, it felt like a home again. As they sat down to eat, Hawk watched the girls chatting about their day at school. Lucy was explaining a complicated math problem to Megan, who listened intently while twirling pasta on her fork. The scene struck him deeply. How natural it felt, how right. The protective instinct he'd felt when they first knocked on his door had grown into something more profound. These girls weren't just two strangers he'd helped anymore. They had become family. And somehow, sharing stories about Alice didn't hurt as much as it used to. Instead, it felt like connecting his past to his present, building a bridge between the life he'd lost and the one he was finding. They ate together in the warm kitchen light, sharing stories and simple moments. For the first time in years, Hawk felt the walls he'd built around his heart continuing to crumble, replaced by something stronger, the bonds of a family he never expected to find. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Hawk pulled up to the diner on his motorcycle. He could feel the stairs before he even removed his helmet. Things had changed in town since he'd taken in Lucy and Megan. Mrs. Peterson, who ran the flower shop, actually waved at him. Tom from the hardware store gave him a friendly nod. It felt strange, this newfound attention. For years, he'd been the mysterious loner who lived on the outskirts of town, the gruff biker who kept to himself. Now people looked at him with something different in their eyes. Respect, maybe even admiration. Inside the diner, conversations hushed slightly as he walked in. Betty, the waitress who'd barely spoken 2 words to him in 5 years, suddenly had plenty to say. "Your usual coffee, Hawk?" She smiled warmly. "The girls doing okay?" He nodded, still uncomfortable with small talk. "They're good. Starting school next week." The support group meetings were the hardest part. 3 times a week, he'd drive Lucy and Megan to the community center where other survivors of domestic violence gathered. The first time, he'd waited in the parking lot, but Lucy had insisted he come inside. "We need you there," she'd said, her voice small but determined. So he sat in the back, listening as others shared their stories. Sometimes Lucy would speak, her voice growing stronger each time. Megan usually stayed quiet, but she'd hold her sister's hand tightly. Hawk learned more about their life with Gordon during those sessions than he had in all their time at his garage. The counselor, Sarah, had praised him for coming. "It means a lot to them," she'd said, "having a positive male figure in their lives, someone who shows them that not all men are like Gordon." The words had stuck with him, making him realize the responsibility he carried. It wasn't just about giving them a safe place anymore, it was about helping them heal. Today was different, though. The town was holding its annual Harvest Festival, and for the first time in years, Hawk had agreed to go. Lucy had convinced him, saying they needed to practice being normal people again. When he pulled up to the community center to pick them up, both girls were waiting outside. Lucy wore a new sweater. She'd started working part-time at the bookstore, and Megan had her hair braided differently. "Ready for this?" he asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Lucy grinned. "Are you?" The festival grounds were crowded, filled with familiar faces and the smell of carnival food. Hawk noticed how Lucy and Megan stayed close to him at first, but gradually began to relax. Megan even laughed when they passed the face-painting booth. They found a quiet spot near the gazebo, sharing a plate of funnel cake. The powdered sugar made a mess, but nobody seemed to mind. A few townspeople stopped by to chat, and Hawk noticed how naturally Lucy handled the conversations now. She'd come a long way from the frightened girl who'd knocked on his garage door that night. Mrs. Johnson from the library committee approached their table, smiling warmly. "Lucy, dear, we'd love to have you help with the children's reading program. Would you be interested?" Lucy looked at Hawk, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I'd like that," she said, her voice steady and sure. The moment felt significant somehow, watching Lucy and Megan interact with others, seeing them slowly reclaim their place in the world. It made all the uncomfortable stares and whispered conversations worth it. The autumn sun cast long shadows through the garage windows as Hawk wiped grease from his hands. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal filled the air. But these days, the garage felt different. Warmer. More alive. "Hey, guess who got her first paycheck?" Lucy burst through the door, waving an envelope. Her face glowed with pride, her server's apron still tied around her waist. Hawk's weathered face broke into a smile. "The cafe treating you right?" "Better than right. Mrs. Peterson says I'm the fastest learner she's had." Lucy hopped onto a workbench, swinging her legs. "And the tips are pretty good too." "That's because you actually smile at the customers," Megan teased, looking up from her textbook. She'd spread her homework across an old card table in the corner of the garage, something that had become her regular study spot. "Speaking of school," Hawk said, "didn't you have a math test today?" Megan's face lit up. "Got an A. Mr. Thompson said my proof was the clearest in the class." Hawk felt his chest swell with pride. These girls, who'd arrived at his door terrified and broken just months ago, were blooming like flowers after a long winter. Lucy had found her confidence behind the cafe counter, chatting easily with customers. And Megan, once so withdrawn, now raised her hand in class and joined study groups. "Well, that calls for celebration," Hawk said, reaching for his jacket. "Pizza night?" "Only if we can get extra cheese," Lucy bargained, already knowing the answer. "Don't I always?" Hawk chuckled. As he grabbed his keys, Hawk thought about his own changes. The local shelter had seemed intimidating at first, all those people, all those expectations. But something about helping others who were down on their luck felt right. Maybe because someone had once helped him, back when he'd returned from his service, lost and angry at the world. "Oh, tell them about the shelter," Megan prompted, closing her textbook. Hawk scratched his beard, slightly embarrassed. "It's nothing much. Just helped fix their heating system last week. Place was freezing." "Nothing much?" Lucy scoffed. "The director called you their guardian angel mechanic. I heard her myself when I dropped off those blankets." "Well, someone's got to keep the place running," Hawk mumbled, but inside, he felt warm at the praise. They piled into his truck, the girls chattering about their day. As they drove through town, Hawk noticed how different everything looked now. The same streets he'd once hurried through, avoiding eye contact, now felt welcoming. People waved, shop owners smiled. At the pizza place, they claimed their usual booth. Lucy launched into a story about a customer who'd ordered 7 different kinds of tea before finally choosing one. Megan giggled, adding her own commentary, while Hawk listened, amazed at how natural this all felt now. Back in the garage, surrounded by the comfortable clutter of tools and parts, they shared the last pieces of pizza. Lucy demonstrated how she'd learned to balance 3 plates on one arm, using empty paper plates. Megan tried to copy her, sending them all into fits of laughter when the plates went flying. Hawk watched them, these 2 remarkable young women who'd crashed into his life and turned it upside down. The garage that had once been his sanctuary of solitude was now filled with homework, teenage gossip, and laughter. The changes had come so gradually he'd hardly noticed, but sitting there, listening to them joke about Lucy's customer service adventures and Megan's school triumphs, he realized something profound. He'd found his family. Not the one he'd expected or planned for, but maybe the one he'd needed all along. The morning dawned cold and gray, matching the nervous energy that filled Hawk's small kitchen. Lucy sat at the worn wooden table, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate without eating. Beside her, Megan's hands trembled as she tried to drink her orange juice. Hawk watched them both, his own stomach too tight for breakfast. "We should leave in 10 minutes, he said, glancing at the clock on the wall. "Don't want to be late." Lucy nodded, finally setting down her fork. She wore a simple blue dress, borrowed from a neighbor, that made her look older than her 17 years. Megan had on a sweater and dark skirt, her hair neatly braided. They both looked so young, so vulnerable. "What if—" Megan started, then stopped herself. "What if what, sweetheart?" Hawk asked gently. The term of endearment surprised even him. It had slipped out naturally. "What if they don't believe us?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Lucy reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. "They'll believe us. We have proof. We have witnesses. We have Hawk." Hawk's chest tightened at Lucy's words. He'd spent weeks helping their lawyer build the case, providing documentation of Gordon's threats, the photos of the girls when they first arrived at his garage, testimonies from neighbors who'd witnessed Gordon's violent behavior. "The truth is on our side," Hawk said firmly, standing up from the table. "That's what matters." The drive to the courthouse was silent. Hawk kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching the girls in the back seat. They sat close together, hands clasped, drawing strength from each other. The sight made his heart ache. The courthouse loomed ahead, its stone steps already crowded with people. Their lawyer, Sarah Matthews, waited for them at the entrance, her briefcase clutched tight against her chest. She greeted them with a reassuring smile. "Are you ready?" she asked, looking at each of them in turn. Lucy straightened her shoulders. "Yes." "Remember," Sarah said, leading them inside. "Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do." The courtroom was intimidating, with its high ceilings and wooden panels. Hawk sat directly behind the girls, close enough to reach out and touch them if they needed support. When Gordon was let in, Megan stiffened. Lucy's hand found her sister's immediately. Gordon looked smaller somehow, in his prison jumpsuit. His eyes were hard as he scanned the room, landing briefly on the girls before moving away. Hawk felt a surge of protective anger, but kept his expression neutral. The proceedings began with the usual formalities. The judge, a stern-faced woman with silver hair, listened intently as Sarah presented their case. Lucy testified first, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about the years of abuse, the fear, the constant threats. Megan followed, quieter, but just as compelling. When it was Hawk's turn, he spoke about the night the girls arrived at his garage, about Gordon's threatening visits, about the visible signs of trauma he'd witnessed. His voice remained steady, even as he described the confrontation that led to Gordon's arrest. Throughout it all, Gordon sat stone-faced, showing no emotion. His lawyer tried to paint the girls as troubled teenagers making up stories, but their testimony held firm. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge called for a brief recess before delivering her verdict. In the hallway, Hawk pulled both girls into a protective embrace. "You did good," he murmured. "Real good." "Thank you," Lucy whispered, "for everything." They returned to the courtroom, hearts pounding. The judge cleared her throat, adjusted her glasses, and began to speak. The morning sun streamed through the garage windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Hawk wiped his hands on an old rag, the familiar smell of motor oil and metal filling his nostrils. But something was different now. The garage didn't feel empty anymore. Lucy sat on a wooden stool near his workbench, her math homework spread out in front of her. She chewed on her pencil, deep in thought. Megan was sprawled on the worn leather couch they'd moved in last week, reading a novel for her English class. The sight of them, so comfortable and at ease, made Hawk's chest tighten with emotion. "Need any help with that?" he asked Lucy, noticing her frustrated expression. She looked up and smiled. "Unless you know anything about trigonometry." "Been a while since high school," Hawk admitted, his weathered face crinkling into a grin. "But I might surprise you." Megan lowered her book. "He helped me with my science project last week, Luce. He's pretty smart for an old biker. Watch who you're calling old, Hawk growled, but his eyes twinkled with amusement. The past few months had changed everything. After Gordon's arrest, the girls had slowly begun to heal. Their nightmares became less frequent, their smiles more genuine. The town had rallied around them, offering support and kindness that still surprised Hawk. He walked over to his bike, running his hand along its gleaming surface. The machine that had once been his only companion now shared space with school backpacks and teen magazines. The walls that were once bare now held photos. Lucy's first job at the cafe, Megan's science fair ribbon, the three of them at the town festival. Hey, Hawk? Megan's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Can we order pizza tonight? Again? He raised an eyebrow. We had pizza 2 days ago. Please, Lucy joined in, giving him the look he could never resist. We can watch that old movie you like, the one about the motorcycles. Hawk shook his head, trying to hide his smile. You two are worse than a couple of stray cats, always begging for food. But you love us anyway, Megan said confidently. The words hit him hard. Love. It wasn't something he'd planned on feeling again after Alice died. But here it was, filling up all the empty spaces in his life. He looked around the garage. Tools still hung in their precise locations, but now they shared wall space with the girls' artwork. His old radio played their favorite songs alongside his classic rock. The calendar on the wall was filled with their activities: Lucy's work schedule, Megan's volleyball games, family dinner nights, family. The word didn't feel strange anymore. Lucy stood up from her homework and walked over to him. You okay? She asked softly. You got quiet there for a minute. Hawk nodded, clearing his throat. Just thinking about how different things are now. Good different? Megan asked, joining them. Yeah, he said, looking at both of them. Good different. The garage had been his sanctuary for years, a place where he could hide from the world. Now it was something else entirely, a place where homework got done, where laughter echoed off the walls, where 3 broken people had somehow become whole again. He picked up his wrench, ready to get back to work. The girls returned to their spots, the comfortable silence settling around them like a warm blanket. The afternoon sun continued its journey across the garage floor, illuminating not just the space, but the new life they'd built together. The morning sun streamed through the garage windows, casting long shadows across the freshly swept concrete floor. Hawk stood at his workbench, organizing his tools with careful precision, just as he'd done countless times before. But everything felt different now. The quiet of his morning routine was broken by the sound of footsteps and cheerful chatter. Lucy and Megan walked into the garage, carrying paper bags from the local bakery. The scent of fresh cinnamon rolls filled the air. Breakfast delivery, Lucy announced, setting the bags down on the clean workbench. She wore her cafe uniform, ready for her morning shift. Her eyes sparkled with confidence, a far cry from the frightened girl who had knocked on his door that fateful night. You didn't have to do that, Hawk said, but his gruff voice held warmth. Megan pulled out 3 paper cups of coffee. Lucy got employee discount, she said with a smile, handing Hawk his cup. Her voice was stronger these days, more sure of itself. They settled into their usual spots, Hawk on his work stool, Lucy perched on the tool chest, and Megan in the old armchair they'd brought out to the garage. It had become their morning ritual whenever their schedules aligned. Got my math test back yesterday, Megan said between bites of her roll. Mrs. Peterson said I got the highest grade in class. Hawk nodded, pride warming his chest. That's because you worked hard for it. Lucy watched her sister with a soft smile. Remember when you used to hate math? Still do, Megan laughed. But at least now I can focus on it without—" She trailed off, but the shadow that usually accompanied memories of their past life barely flickered across her face. Hawk noticed how Lucy's protective instinct, while still there, had evolved into something healthier. She no longer carried the weight of being solely responsible for her sister's well-being. They were all learning to share that burden, to be there for each other in different ways. "The community center called," Hawk said, wiping crumbs from his mustache. "They want to know if I'd consider teaching a basic motorcycle maintenance course." "You should do it," Lucy said immediately. "You're a great teacher." She gestured to the bike she'd been learning to work on under his guidance. "Maybe," Hawk mumbled, but he was already considering it. The thought of helping others, of sharing what he knew, it didn't seem as daunting as it once had. Megan checked her watch and jumped up. "We better go. I have study group before class." Lucy gathered their breakfast trash, then hesitated. "Don't forget, dinner at 6? I'm trying that new recipe you showed me." Hawk nodded. "I'll be there." The words came easily now, a promise he knew he'd keep. They headed toward the door, but Lucy turned back. "Thanks, Hawk. For everything." "Go on," he said gruffly, but his eyes were soft. "You'll be late." As he watched them walk away, Hawk felt the familiar ache in his chest. But it wasn't the old pain of loss anymore. It was something different, something full and warm. He looked around his garage, at the space that had once been his refuge from the world. Now it was something else entirely. A place where healing had begun, where a broken man and 2 scared girls had somehow become a family. He walked to the doorway, watching as Lucy and Megan got into Lucy's used car, the one they'd fixed up together. The morning sun caught them just right, making them glow with possibility. Hawk leaned against the doorframe, allowing himself to feel the simple joy of the moment. They were going to be okay. All of them. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Hawk's garage as he worked on his motorcycle, the familiar sound of metal against metal echoing through the space. But unlike the lonely days of his past, he wasn't alone anymore. Lucy sat on a workbench nearby, her legs dangling as she watched him work, while Megan was curled up in an old armchair they'd brought out, reading a book. "Mr. Peterson stopped by the cafe again today," Lucy said, handing Hawk a wrench. "He wanted to make sure we had everything we needed for winter." Hawk nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The town had changed its tune completely since the court hearing. Where there were once whispers and suspicious glances, there were now friendly waves and offers of help. "Sarah from the grocery store gave me extra apples yesterday," Megan added, looking up from her book. "She said they were just going to go bad anyway, but I know she was being nice." The garage door was open, letting in the crisp autumn air. Mrs. Thompson from next door walked by, waving cheerfully. "Don't forget about the Harvest Festival this weekend," she called out. "We're counting on those famous sugar cookies of yours, Megan." Megan beamed with pride. She'd discovered a talent for baking, and the whole town had taken notice. The same people who once viewed them with suspicion now couldn't get enough of her treats. Lucy hopped down from the workbench and grabbed a rag to help clean some tools. "Remember when we first came here?" she asked quietly. "I was so scared you'd turn us away." Hawk paused his work, looking at the young woman Lucy had become. Gone was the terrified girl who'd knocked on his door that midnight. In her place stood someone confident, someone who'd found her strength. "I'm glad I didn't," Hawk replied, his gruff voice softening. "You two taught me more than I could have imagined." "About what?" Megan asked, setting her book aside. "About family," he answered simply. "About letting people in." The sound of more visitors interrupted their conversation. Tom from the hardware store and his wife, Jenny, were walking up the driveway, carrying covered dishes. "Hope we're not interrupting," Tom called out. "Jenny made her famous lasagna. Thought you folks might enjoy some." "And there's apple pie for dessert," Jenny added with a warm smile. This was their new normal now. Unexpected visits, shared meals, and a sense of belonging that went beyond blood ties. The garage, once Hawk's solitary refuge, had become a gathering place for their expanding circle of friends and supporters. Lucy helped Jenny set up the food on the workbench they'd cleared, while Megan ran inside to grab plates and utensils. Hawk watched them move with easy familiarity through the space that had once been his lonely sanctuary. "You've done good by those girls, Hawk," Tom said quietly, standing beside him. "The whole town sees it." Hawk nodded, emotion catching in his throat. He thought about the long journey they'd taken, from that first terrified knock to this moment of peaceful contentment. The fear was gone from the girls' eyes now, replaced by confidence and joy. The garage filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter as they all sat down to eat together. Megan told stories about her latest baking experiments, while Lucy shared funny incidents from the cafe. The warmth of community and family filled every corner of the space, chasing away the last shadows of their difficult past. The morning sun painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges as Hawk loaded the last bag into his truck. Lucy and Megan stood on the porch, their faces bright with excitement. It was their first real trip together, a weekend getaway to celebrate 6 months of freedom from Gordon and their new life as a family. "Everyone ready?" Hawk called out, his usually gruff voice carrying a hint of warmth that had become more common these days. Lucy bounced down the steps, her long hair swinging in a ponytail. "I can't believe we're actually going on vacation," she said, climbing into the passenger seat. Megan followed close behind, clutching her backpack. "I packed extra snacks," she announced proudly, settling into the back seat. As they pulled out of the driveway, Hawk caught glimpses of their neighbors waving goodbye. It still felt strange sometimes, being part of the community instead of the lonely biker everyone avoided. The town had embraced them, especially after Gordon's conviction, and their story had inspired others to speak up about abuse. The drive to the lake house took about 3 hours. Hawk listened as the girls chatted about school, their friends, and their plans for the summer. Every now and then, he'd catch himself smiling in the rearview mirror, something that would have been unthinkable just months ago. "Remember that first night?" Lucy asked suddenly, her voice soft. "When we knocked on your garage door?" Hawk's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "How could I forget? 2 scared kids showing up at midnight." "I was so terrified," Megan admitted from the back seat. "But something told me we could trust you, even though you tried to act all tough and scary." "I was scary," Hawk protested, but his eyes crinkled with amusement. "Please," Lucy laughed. "You made us hot chocolate that very first night." The lake came into view, its surface sparkling under the morning sun. Hawk pulled up to a small cabin nestled among tall pine trees. The girls tumbled out of the truck, their earlier quiet reflection forgotten in their excitement to explore. "This is amazing," Megan called out, running toward the wooden dock that stretched into the water. Hawk watched them from the porch, remembering how different they had been 6 months ago. Frightened, withdrawn, always looking over their shoulders. Now Lucy stood tall, confident in her own skin, while Megan's laugh rang out freely across the water. They spent the morning unpacking and settling in. After lunch, they walked down to the lake, where Hawk taught them how to skip stones across the water. Lucy turned out to be a natural, while Megan's stones mostly plunked straight down, creating big splashes that had them all laughing. As the afternoon sun warmed their shoulders, they sat on the dock, feet dangling in the cool water. "You know," Lucy said thoughtfully, I used to think we'd never be happy again. After Mom died, and then with Gordon—" She trailed off, but her voice was steady. Hawk nodded, understanding the weight of what she wasn't saying. "Life has a way of surprising you," he said. "Sometimes the worst moments lead you to exactly where you need to be." Megan leaned against his arm, something she'd started doing more often lately. "I'm glad we found you, Hawk." They stayed like that for a while, watching the sunlight dance on the water, each lost in their own thoughts about how far they'd come. When it was time to head back home, they packed up the truck with lighter hearts and stronger bonds than ever before. As they pulled onto the highway, Hawk glanced at his passengers, Lucy humming along to the radio, Megan already dozing in the back seat, and felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. They were heading back to their house, but more importantly, they were heading home. Lucy sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by college brochures and application forms. Her dark hair fell forward as she leaned over a particularly thick packet from State University. Megan perched next to her, flipping through a glossy viewbook filled with photos of smiling students and tree-lined campuses. "Look at this one," Megan said, pointing to a picture of a beautiful library. "They have a whole floor just for art students." Lucy smiled at her sister's enthusiasm. Just 6 months ago, they wouldn't have dared to dream about college. Now, here they were, planning their futures like normal teenagers. The thought made her throat tight with emotion. Hawk moved around the kitchen, making coffee and trying not to hover too obviously. But Lucy caught him glancing their way every few minutes, a mix of pride and protectiveness in his eyes. "The application deadline for State is next month," Lucy said, checking her calendar. "I need to finish my personal essay." She tapped her pen against the table, thinking about what to write. "You should write about your mechanical skills," Hawk suggested, finally joining them at the table. "Not many engineering applicants can rebuild a carburetor." Lucy laughed. "I learned from the best." The hours she'd spent in Hawk's garage had turned into more than just a hiding place. They'd become valuable lessons. She'd discovered a talent she never knew she had. Megan spread out her own applications. She was only a sophomore, but she was already thinking ahead. "I want to study art therapy," she said quietly, "to help other kids, like us." The room grew still for a moment. Lucy reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. They'd both been seeing a counselor, working through their trauma. Megan had found healing in her art, filling sketchbooks with increasingly hopeful images. "That's a fine choice," Hawk said, his voice gruff with emotion. He cleared his throat and added, "You'd be good at that." Lucy watched as Megan's face lit up at the praise. Their relationship with Hawk had grown so natural, it was hard to remember a time when he'd been just the scary biker who lived down the street. "I got my acceptance letter from community college yesterday," Lucy admitted, pulling an envelope from her bag. "For the summer mechanics program." "Why didn't you say something?" Hawk asked, reaching for the letter. "I wanted to be sure it was real," Lucy said. "I must have read it 20 times. Hawk scanned the letter, his weathered face breaking into a rare, full smile. "This is real, all right. Full scholarship, too." "It's just the beginning," Lucy said. "I can transfer to State after 2 years." She pulled out a carefully planned spreadsheet showing her academic path. "Always the practical one," Megan teased, but her eyes shone with pride for her sister. Hawk watched them both. These girls who had shown up at his garage door that night, desperate and afraid. Now Lucy was confidently planning her college career, and Megan was dreaming of helping others. They'd grown so much stronger, yet somehow managed to keep their hearts soft. "Well," he said, standing up to refill his coffee cup. "Looks like we better start planning some campus visits." He paused, then added, "After we finish that Harley in the garage. Can't leave a job half done." Lucy grinned, gathering up her applications. Wouldn't dream of it. She knew that working on bikes with Hawk would always be part of their lives, even as they moved forward into their futures. The late afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen window, warming the scattered college brochures and casting a golden glow over their plans and possibilities. Hawk sat at his workbench, carefully going through a stack of college brochures that Lucy had left scattered around. His weathered hands, stained with engine grease, traced the glossy pages with unexpected tenderness. Each pamphlet represented a different future, a different path forward for the girls who had changed his life so completely. The garage looked different now. What was once a sanctuary of solitude had transformed into a warm, lived-in space. Lucy's homework often covered one corner of his workbench, while Megan's art supplies claimed another. Their presence had softened the edges of his world, filling it with color and life. "Hey," Lucy called from the doorway. She walked in carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this." Hawk accepted the cup with a grateful nod. "Thanks, kiddo." The nickname felt natural now, where once it would have stuck in his throat. "Looking at the University of Michigan again?" Lucy peered over his shoulder. "That's my top choice, you know." "Yeah, I know." Hawk's voice was gruff but warm. "Their engineering program's solid. You'd do well there." Lucy settled onto a nearby stool, her fingers wrapped around her own coffee cup. "I never thought I'd be thinking about college. Before—" She trailed off, but Hawk understood. "Life's funny that way," he said, setting down his coffee. "Sometimes the worst storms lead you to safe harbor." Megan appeared in the doorway, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. "Are you guys having another college talk without me?" "Get in here," Hawk said, pulling up another stool. "Your sister's just trying to convince me that Michigan isn't too far away." "It's only 4 hours," Lucy protested, but her eyes twinkled. "And I'll come home on weekends, sometimes." "Sometimes," Hawk echoed, shaking his head. He reached for a worn leather folder beneath the brochures. "Been meaning to show you both something." Inside were papers, legal documents he'd been working on with his lawyer. "I've been thinking about the future," he said slowly. "About making sure you girls are taken care of, no matter what." Lucy and Megan leaned in closer as Hawk explained his plans. He'd set up college funds for both of them, using money he'd saved over the years. The garage would be theirs one day, too, a place to always call home. "But Hawk," Megan started, her voice thick with emotion, "you don't have to." "I want to," he cut in firmly. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. A purpose, a family." Lucy wiped at her eyes, trying to hide her tears. "We're the lucky ones," she insisted. "You saved us." "We saved each other," Hawk corrected, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "And now we build on that, together." The late afternoon sun streamed through the garage windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The familiar scent of motor oil mixed with the coffee's aroma, creating a comfort that felt like home. Megan opened her sketchbook, showing them her latest drawing, a portrait of the 3 of them, sitting just like this in the garage. The detail was impressive, capturing not just their likenesses but the warmth between them. "This is us," she said simply. Hawk looked at the drawing, then at the 2 girls who had become his family. His chest felt full, almost too full, with gratitude and love. They sat together in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts but connected by the bonds they'd forged through adversity. The future stretched before them, full of possibility and hope. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was theirs. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Hawk's kitchen, casting warm patches of light across the wooden table. The smell of fresh-baked cookies filled the air, mixing with the aroma of coffee and the sound of gentle laughter. Hawk watched as Lucy pulled another batch of chocolate chip cookies from the oven, her movements confident and relaxed. "These are definitely better than your first attempt," Megan teased, reaching for one of the cooled cookies. Her eyes sparkled with mischief as she dodged Lucy's playful swat. "Hey, those early ones weren't that bad," Lucy protested, but she was smiling too. "They were just extra crispy." "Is that what we're calling burnt now?" Hawk chuckled, his deep voice warm with affection. He'd set out 3 coffee mugs and a plate of sandwiches on the counter, preparing for their little celebration. The kitchen had changed in the past months. What was once a sparse, barely used space now held signs of life everywhere. Drawings stuck to the fridge, a collection of mismatched mugs in the cabinet, and well-worn cookbooks stacked on the counter. It wasn't just the kitchen that had transformed. The whole house felt different, filled with the kind of warmth that only comes from being truly lived in. Lucy arranged the cookies on a plate while Megan set out napkins. The simple act of preparing for their celebration together made Hawk's heart swell. He remembered the first night the girls had shown up at his garage, terrified and desperate. Now, watching them move comfortably around his kitchen, their kitchen, he could hardly believe how far they'd come. "I got my acceptance letter today," Lucy announced, her voice proud but slightly nervous. She pulled an envelope from her back pocket and smoothed it carefully on the table. "To the community college. I can start the mechanics program in the fall." "That's my girl," Hawk said, his voice rough with emotion. He remembered the hours they'd spent together in the garage, Lucy's natural talent for understanding engines matching his own. "You'll be running that garage before you know it." Megan bounced excitedly in her chair. "And I got an A on my history project. Mrs. Thompson said it was the best presentation in the class." "Look at you two," Hawk said, shaking his head in wonder. He poured coffee into their mugs, adding extra cream to Megan's just the way she liked it. "Making this old man proud." Lucy's eyes grew serious for a moment. "We wouldn't be here without you, Hawk. You know that, right?" The weight of her words hung in the air. Hawk thought about Alice, about how she would have loved these girls. He thought about all the years he'd spent alone in this house, thinking his chance at family had passed him by. "Well," he said, clearing his throat against the emotion building there. "Seems to me we all saved each other." Megan got up and wrapped her arms around his waist in a tight hug. Lucy joined them, and for a moment they stood together in the warm kitchen light. Finally, Hawk stepped back and raised his coffee mug. "To family," he said simply. "To family," the girls echoed, lifting their own mugs. The cookies were perfect. The coffee was hot. And as Hawk looked at the 2 young women who had become his daughters in every way that mattered, he felt his heart full to bursting. In this moment, in this kitchen, with these 2 remarkable girls, he had found something he thought he'd lost forever, a sense of belonging, of purpose, of family. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.